Well, it's so good to be with all of you. And my name is Miss Tandi, and I'm on staff here with Grace Kids. So let's do a recap of where we are. We are now in the time of the kings. We've learned about the first king of Israel, King Saul, who has what we might say half a heart for God. He does not fully love God, so he doesn't completely obey him. And so God chooses another, a boy named David, who of course doesn't become king right away. He eventually becomes a warrior in King Saul's army, and King Saul grows jealous of him and wants to kill him. And so for years, probably 10 to 15 years, David has to actually run for his life, living in deserts and caves, not knowing who to trust. It's a hard time for him, but he doesn't stop loving God and trusting him, and he waits for God to make him king. Well, eventually, King Saul and his son Jonathan die in battle when they're fighting the Philistines. And so the tribe of Judah comes and makes David their king. Then 7 years later, the rest of the tribes of Israel come and make David their king. And he now is king over all of Israel. He then captures the city of Jerusalem and makes that the capital city. He then builds himself a palace and then brings the tent and the ark of the covenant to Jerusalem, making it the center of worship for the entire nation of Israel. And that's where we will begin our story today in 2 Samuel 7, verse 1. And we read, "So when the king had settled into his palace, and the Lord had given him rest on every side from all his enemies, the king said to the prophet Nathan, 'Look, I'm living in a cedar house while the ark sits inside a tent.' And so Nathan the prophet told the king, 'Go and do all that is in your mind, for the Lord is with you.'" But God had a different plan. And so that night, God gives a message to the prophet Nathan to tell David the next day. And he tells him, "From the time I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until today, I haven't lived in a house. Have I ever spoken a word to anyone, any of the leaders, asking, 'Why haven't you built me a house of cedar?'" God is not asking David to build him a house. But there's more to the message. He goes on to say, "Tell David, you used to be a shepherd. Don't you remember? But I made you a king. I helped you defeat your enemies. And I promise you, David, that you and your descendants will be kings. And when you die, one of your sons will be king. He will build a house for me. I will love him, and I will never leave him. When your son dies, his son will become king. The king will always be someone from your family." When the prophet Nathan tells David this the next day, all that David can do is he goes into the tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. And the Bible tells us he sits in the presence of God and he prays, "Lord God, I don't deserve anything you have done for me. And yet you promise now to do so much more. You, God, are great. There is none like you. And I know you will keep all your promises, for you are trustworthy." But you know, in the nation of Israel today, a king is not ruling from David's family. So what has happened to God's promise? The Bible tells us there is only one king, and he is Jesus. The gospel writer Matthew, as he recounts the story of when Jesus came as a baby, Joseph, his earthly father, was from the family of David. And then when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary to tell her that she is going to have a baby, he announces, "He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Israel forever, and his kingdom will have no end." Jesus is on the throne. He is ruling. And he is coming back to earth one day, and he is going to defeat evil once and for all. And every knee is going to bow, and every person is going to proclaim that Jesus Christ is King to the glory of God the Father. But in the meantime, God has given us a mission. He wants us to spread this good news of Jesus, and he wants us to show the world what his kingdom is like. And our new memory passage is going to remind us of this mission. So this memory passage, it's for all of us. It's not just for the kids. It's only 4 verses long, comes from 1 Peter, what we've been learning about, chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. And parents, I have these cards were in the lesson that we sent out yesterday, so you can print them out, cut them apart, and have your kids memorize them. And we are going slow, and we have review weeks built in, so everybody can learn this, because we don't want to forget our mission. So we're going to begin with just the first half of verse 9, and this is building on what Pastor Thomas taught us last week, right? About who we are. We're a chosen race. God has chosen us. Wow. We're a royal priesthood. Royal meaning we belong to the king's family. So we are royal. We are all a part of the king's family. We're a holy nation. We are set apart. We do not live like the world lives. And we are a people of God's own possession. We belong to God. So let's learn this and remember who we are.